In 1351, English law ordered workers to accept the pay common 5 or 6 years earlier. The reason was a labor shortage so severe that employers were offering more, and workers were leaving in search of better terms. Parliament was trying to force an economy back into its pre-plague shape. That law is where this story begins, not with a pile of bodies, but with a government discovering that an epidemic's effects could outlast the emergency itself. We are counting down 4 of history's worst pandemics, from an ancient outbreak whose pathogen remains unknown to the influenza pandemic of 1918. What connects them is not a claim that disease alone remade whole societies. It is the evidence left afterward: emergency recruitment, contested wage rules, overlapping epidemics and colonial violence, and viral descendants that survived their original pandemic. We'll start in the Roman Empire. Number 4. The Antonine Plague. Approximately 165 to 180 AD. The Antonine Plague affected the Roman Empire from 165 to around 180. What historians do not know. No pathogen has been identified. Historian Kyle Harper says most specialists favor smallpox, or an ancient ancestor of it, from descriptions in Roman texts, but he is explicit that certainty is impossible without biological evidence. The scale is uncertain too. Harper gives a very wide range, an estimated 5 to 25% of the Roman population. That is not a point estimate hiding inside a range. It is a warning about how little demographic evidence survives from antiquity. The Getty Research Institute summarizes the conventional route into the empire: soldiers returning from a Near Eastern campaign carried the disease back. Beyond that broad account, the details become less secure. We cannot confidently name the first infected unit, the first city, or a precise chain of transmission from the surviving evidence. What we can see is how Roman writers connected the epidemic to emergency decisions. The Historia Augusta biography of Marcus Aurelius says a grievous pestilence. Elsewhere, while it says the pestilence was still raging, the same biography reports that Marcus trained slaves for military service, armed gladiators, turned bandits from Dalmatia and Dardania into soldiers, hired German auxiliaries, and enrolled legions. That text is not a modern personnel ledger, and it does not prove that every recruitment decision was caused by disease. But it does show an emperor widening the military labor pool during the outbreak. That is a firmer aftermath claim than saying the army was almost erased or that the plague caused Rome's later decline. The same biography links Marcus's final illness to pestilence. It says he spoke about the epidemic, then sent his son away for fear that the illness might spread. Because this is a literary source rather than a diagnosis, the responsible conclusion is limited. The plague may have shaped the circumstances of his death, the cause cannot be established. So the Antonine aftermath is not a neat collapse story. It is a documented moment of improvisation under pressure, surrounded by large uncertainties about the disease, its mortality, and its long-term effects. Number 3. The Black Death. 1347 to 1353. This is the one everybody knows, but its headline number is still debated. Oxford historian James Bellich describes the older estimate as 25 to 33% of Western Europe's population between 1347 and 1353. He says later work on manorial records instead suggests about 50%. Those are competing estimates, not permission to sharpen the toll into a single settled number. England offers unusually detailed evidence, though it remains a reconstruction. One computer-assisted estimate cited by Oxford places the population at 4.8 million in 1348 and 2.6 million in 1351, an estimated decline of 46%. The same Oxford account warns that medieval population statistics are often guesses built on other guesses. The labor market aftermath is clearer than the exact toll. A George Washington University review says wages and income per person rose at first, but that the gains were sustained in only some parts of Europe. Scarce labor created bargaining pressure, but the result varied by place, occupation, and decade. English law recorded the conflict. The Statute of Labourers of 1351 said workers were demanding double or triple their former pay. It ordered wages back toward the level common 5 or 6 years earlier and threatened imprisonment for leaving agreed service without permission. Fordham's sourcebook describes it as an unsuccessful attempt to enforce an earlier ordinance. Even the wage story needs a timeline. In one University of California, Davis Reconstruction, real agricultural wages in the 1350s and 1360s were slightly below their average before the plague. The increase did not appear in that series until the 1370s. By the 15th century, the same reconstruction puts average real agricultural wages 64% above the pre-plague level. Its author notes that enforcement of the 1351 law may help explain the delay. Became rich. Nominal pay, prices, enforcement, and regional differences moved on different schedules. The defensible aftermath is that plague-era labor scarcity produced an immediate legal struggle and was associated with lasting economic changes, not that one epidemic pushed every European worker in the same direction. Number 2. Smallpox and the Great Dying. From 1492 onward. Smallpox was one of several diseases introduced after European contact with into the Caribbean and Central and South America to the 16th century, through European settlement and the African slave trade. But the phrase Great Dying refers to a much larger demographic catastrophe, not to one smallpox epidemic. The numbers have to be handled as estimates. A University College London team synthesized 119 published regional estimates and calculated a pre-1492 population of 60.5 million, with an interquartile range from 44.8 to 78. European epidemics removed 90% over the following century, with an interquartile range from 87 to 92%. Those confidence bounds belong with the figures, dropping them would create false precision. The sequence in Mexico also warns against treating every later epidemic as imported smallpox. A CDC historical review estimates that the smallpox epidemic of 1519 to 1520 killed between 5 and 8 million people. It then estimates another 7 to 17 million deaths in epidemics beginning in 1545 and 1576, but argues those later Cocolitli outbreaks were probably indigenous hemorrhagic fevers. The authors say drought, poor living conditions, and harsh treatment under the encomienda system appear to have magnified their effects. Disease was only one part of the colonial record. The Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian also identifies warfare, enslavement, forced relocation, theft of resources, and disruption of native lives and lands. That does not make its only explanation would exceed what the institutional sources say. So this entry has no clean single pathogen, single percentage, or single causal chain. It is a succession of epidemics interacting with conquest and colonial conditions over generations. Its aftermath cannot be separated honestly from those overlapping forces, and indigenous survival and continuity cannot be erased from the ending. Number 1. The 1918 influenza pandemic. February. This is the most recent entry, and its dates are unusually specific. Bowdoin College's archival history gives the span as February 1918 to April 1920 and describes 4 successive waves. The pandemic ended. What persisted was its viral lineage. Even here, the toll is not one settled number. The World Health Organization estimates that about 500 million people, roughly 1/3 of the world at the time, were infected and that between 20 and 50 million died. A CDC journal review instead estimates about 50 million deaths and argues the total may have been as high as 100 million. Both formulations are estimates, the disagreement should remain visible. The age pattern was unusual too. The CDC review says deaths were concentrated in an unusually young age group, while also noting that most cases in industrialized countries were mild. That combination matters because a memorable mortality pattern should not be turned into a claim that every young adult faced the same outcome. The name came from reporting conditions, not origin. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library says neutral Spain was not constrained by wartime censorship, while countries at war restricted broad coverage to protect morale. Spanish newspapers therefore reported the outbreak more freely, making Spain appear to be its center. The CDC review says the geographic origin remains unknown. Then comes the biological aftermath. The CDC review says almost all influenza A cases worldwide after 1918 were caused by descendants of the 1918 virus, including drifted H1N1 viruses and reassorted H2N2 and H3N2 viruses. It also says mortality data from the 1920s suggests that within a few years, influenza had settled into annual epidemics with substantially lower death rates. Later pandemics were part of that family history. Who dates them to 1957 to 1958, 1968 to 1969, and 2009 to 2010. Calling them descendants does not mean they were biologically identical to the 1918 virus, and it does not mean the emergency of 1918 never ended. It means viral evolution carried parts of that lineage forward. Here is the pattern across all four of these events and their very different records. None of them reduces to disease in, society out. The Roman sources show emergency recruitment during pestilence, not a proven straight line to imperial decline. Black Death research shows a wage struggle whose effects varied across time and place. The Great Dying evidence combines imported and indigenous disease. Influenza's pandemic emergency ended, while descendant lineages continued to evolve. That is the pattern across all four. Aftermaths are real, but they are not simple. Dates can mark an outbreak. They cannot by themselves tell us which institutional, economic, or biological changes came from the pathogen, which came from human responses, and which emerged from several pressures at once. That is why source confidence matters as much as narrative force. The uncertainty is part of the history, not a flaw in it. Which aftermath surprised you most? Rome widening recruitment during pestilence, England trying to force wages backward, the multiple causes hidden inside the Great Dying, or the descendants of the 1918 virus? Leave your answer in the comments. The next episode asks what would happen to the planet's built environments and ecosystems if humans disappeared.